Joining me now is FEMA Administrator Brock Long. Mr. Long, welcome back to Meet the Press.
How you doing, Chuck?
Let me just start with what you can tell us this morning. We know that this is a water event. There's a lot of flooding issues you're dealing with. I know you anticipated catastrophic flooding. Is it as anticipated? Are there areas that it's worse than you expected? Are there areas that it's better than expected?
Well, unfortunately, the event is going to it's still unfolding for the next 48 hours. The National Hurricane Center did a phenomenal job of letting people know nearly a week in advance of what was coming, and everything that they've been predicting, the storm surge, the ocean rising, the coastal flood inundation was realized. You saw the ocean rise anywhere from 9 to 11 feet, causing a lot of damage along the coast and in the back bay and inlet areas of the Pamlico Sound. And now what you're seeing is we're seeing actual rainfall in 30 inches or more in some areas. I think Swansboro, North Carolina's got 30 inches. So we're seeing damage very, as predicted, unfortunately.
What is your biggest need right now? What are the biggest needs down there right now?
Well, right now we're focused on life safety, search and rescue. Our urban search and rescue teams, we pre-positioned, I think, over 27 different teams. Like 1,300 people in the field doing search and rescue, supporting our state, local capabilities, from the National Guard to local swiftwater rescues. They've performed several hundred evacuations and rescues in isolated areas. And I think what we're about to see, because of the inland flooding and roadways going underwater, we're going to be able to have to service people in isolated areas that are surrounded by floodwaters. And then it's always a difficult life sustainment mission. People are displaced, they're in a shelter. We just need to make sure that we're meeting the demands of taking care of people in those shelters. But right now, you've got a strong governor, Roy Cooper, in North Carolina, a strong Division of Emergency Management Director in Mike Sprayberry, and we're meeting their demands as they're coming up to us, and we'll get through this. It'll be ugly, but we'll get through it. I mean, recovery is always a very frustrating process for people when they've lost their livelihood, but we're going to be okay.
Obviously, it takes a little bit longer to start recovery efforts when you have a flooding situation. That was what happened in Houston with Harvey. How long do you expect this flooding event to basically hamper your ability to do some of the biggest part of the disaster recovery? Well,
we have to wait for the hazardous elements associated with the storm to exit the area before we can actually send our people in. We never want to put our own people in harm's way. The frustrating thing about an inland flood like this in North Carolina or South Carolina as well is that you got to wait for the water to recede in some cases to get people back in or to fix infrastructure. And as you've seen, you've got major roadway corridors like I-40 and I-95 being compromised in some areas or underwater. And, we have to do things like figure out other logistical routes to get supplies in to those that were impacted on the coast now that they're, the threat is diminishing and moving inland.
Are all dams holding? There was some concern last night about one dam breaking. Have all dams held so far?
I think we've got reports of, private dams and maybe there's other things like agricultural dams that could be compromised. But the most part, that's probably going to be pretty common. That's something that we've been talking about, particularly in eastern North Carolina, anywhere between Raleigh and the coast. You got a lot of agriculture farms, hog farms with the lagoons that are built that have broken. They've been proven to, they've been broken in Floyd back in 1999 or Matthew. So those are the common problems that we continue to see.
As your preparation began, a reporter asked a simple question about what lessons were learned from Puerto Rico.
Sure.
And the president went off and sort of didn't accept the premise that there were lessons to be learned from Puerto Rico. Were there lessons to be learned from Puerto Rico for you, sir?
Yeah, I don't believe the president. I think the president's being taken out of context there. I mean, I talk to the president every day this week, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. We discuss what we're trying to do as a result of last year. He's well aware of that. And the thing about Puerto Rico is that disaster response and recovery it's a whole community team effort. You have to have anybody from neighbor helping neighbor like the Cajun Navy all the way up to the federal government response. And I always say that emergency management is like a chair with four legs. One leg represents the federal government, the other leg represents the state and local government, the third leg represents the private sector and NGOs, and the private sector owns 85% of the infrastructure in this country, and then the fourth leg is you, the citizen. So anytime that there is one leg missing going into a responsive recovery.
Which leg was missing in Puerto Rico?
Well, let's face it, FEMA, I'll be honest, I mean, FEMA was the first responder and the only responder for many weeks going into Puerto Rico. So here's what we're doing to change that. We're working with Governor Rosselló. He, like me, just came into his job, right, and gets hit with one of the most complex disasters. I work with Governor Rosselló and his staff every day to say, hey, how do we build a stronger emergency management capability in the Commonwealth and at the 78 municipality level? And not only have we hired 1,800. FEMA's now one of the largest employers in Puerto Rico. I got the best of what Puerto Rico's got to offer. I've got teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers that are now part of FEMA helping the Commonwealth to design a more viable and economic future going forward.
The president has been disputing the death toll, multiple tweets. He said over many months it went to 64 people, then like magic, 3,000 people killed. Believe it or not, Mr. Long, the White House put out a 5-page backgrounder citing other death toll numbers that were less than the one that the governor of Puerto Rico has accepted. 2,975 people died as a result of Hurricane Maria or impact from Hurricane Maria, according to the Puerto Rican government. Does FEMA accept that number?
So the numbers are all over the place. FEMA doesn't count deaths. And like if you take what's going on with Florence, the deaths that are verified by the local county coroners are the ones that we take. Now, what we do offer are funeral benefits after a disaster for those that are eligible. And so those are some of the numbers that you can put forward that can be cross-referenced with any of the numbers that are out there. But here's the thing. These guys are so dedicated. They work around the clock. One death is a death too many.
But then why does it matter? Why is the White House so concerned about the difference between 3,000 deaths and say another report that might have had it at 1,800 deaths? I mean, you've said yourself it doesn't matter, but the White House believes it matters. Why?
Well, I'll tell you this. One thing about President Trump is that he is probably the one president that has had more support for what goes on back here. And I think he's defensive because he knows how hard these guys behind me work day in and day out for a very complex situation. And it's frustrating. Those studies, the Harvard study was done differently than the George Washington study or this study or that study. And the numbers are all over the place. And where the 65, hold on.
Is it fair? I mean, he said Democrats did it to make him look bad. Do you believe any of these studies were done to make the president look bad?
Well, I mean, I don't think the studies, I don't know why the studies were done. I mean, I think what we're trying to do, in my opinion, what we've got to do is figure out why people die from direct deaths, which is the wind, the water, and the waves, buildings collapsing, which is probably where the 65 number came from. And then there's indirect deaths. So the George Washington study looked at what happened 6 months after the fact. And what happens is, and even in this event, you might see more deaths indirectly occur as time goes on because people have heart attacks due to stress. They fall off their house trying to fix their roof. They die in car crashes because they went through an intersection where the stoplights weren't working. The other thing that goes on, there's all kinds of studies on this that we take a look at. Spousal abuse goes through the roof. You can't blame spousal abuse, after a disaster on anybody. And the president's very passionate about the work we've done. He's been incredibly supportive of me and the staff. He's actually, I bet he's probably the only president that's held 2 cabinet-level meetings, brought his entire cabinet to this agency to show support. They come through this agency every day. And he's very supportive, which is exactly what FEMA needs. There's just too much blame going around, and we need to be focused, Chuck, on what is Puerto Rico going to look like tomorrow.
Final question, Wall Street Journal headline, a bit disconcerting, I'm sure, for you, as you're preparing, saying your job, that the White House considered replacing you before Hurricane Florence hit, having to do with your use of travel back home to North Carolina. Yeah. Were you aware of this investigation? Are you cooperating?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And look, let me go ahead and clear up all the news. Secretary Nielsen has never asked me to resign. We have a very functional and professional relationship. We talk every day. We are both solely focused on Florence. And let's put some context around this. So these vehicles, I mean, the FEMA administration position, the position that I hold, is incredibly complex, Chuck. You do not want to trade jobs with me. Right. The bottom line is that these vehicles were designed to support Presidential Preparedness Directive 40. I have a very critical and important role to make sure that this government works on the nation's worst day through continuity of government. These vehicles are designed to provide secure communications, and the program was actually developed back in 2008. It ran for me the same way it's run for anybody else. And you know, it's my understanding that maybe some policies were not developed around these vehicles that we will get cleared up and pushed forward. So, yeah.
You have no plans to resign?
No. No. I'm here to serve my country every day. That's all I do.
All right.
And when it's over, you know, whenever it ends, you know, I'm ready to go back home, love my family.
All right, Brock Long, I know you've got to get back to work. Director of FEMA, thanks for coming on and answering our questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.